my communal experience, from its announcement to its recognition through ceremony. You travel to Africa, from the top of the continent to the bottom. In most cities, towns, and villages, you will see notices of people's death. Not small obituaries in newspapers, but flyers, posters, and billboards plastered all around. Listed on them is usually a litany of names of the bereaved, not just immediate relatives, but also names of extended family members, whether local or living abroad, and tribal or community leaders. All of these people to whom the deceased belong are listed on the obituary notices. And the funeral services are often attended by people who were not even personally acquainted with the deceased. That's because in Africa, we do not mourn as individuals. We mourn as community. We mourn as families. We mourn as nations. In this case, we're mourning an entire community today. As the African Union champion on reparations, I'm here today on behalf of the 1.4 billion citizens of the African continent. We will lay down this wreath this morning to honor the memories of the nearly 20,000 Africans who are buried on these grounds, some of whom were free, but most of whom were enslaved. I cannot speak of the events that transpired here in New York without also mentioning the events that occurred on the African continent, especially in my homeland, Ghana. Those events are not separate stories, as we've been led to believe. They are parts of one single narrative, sometimes even happening concurrently. It is a narrative that was quite literally branded, carved, burned, and beaten into the bones of people, human beings, including our ancestors who are buried here. Ghana has more than 30 slave forts and castles, more than any other African country. As such, there's a high probability that many of the African men and women and children who were enslaved came through, if not from, the land that is now known as Ghana. One of these forts is known as the Cromantine Fort. It was built by the British in 1631. Enslaved Africans were transported from there to the British colonies in the Caribbean and America. These individuals came to be referred to as the Coromantes. In 1665, the Coromantine Fort was captured by the Dutch as retribution because the British had seized many of its territories and holdings, such as the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam, which just a year earlier in 1664 had been taken by the British and renamed New York. This burial ground is believed to have been in use as early as the mid-1600s, but the first written record of its existence dates back to 1712. That year there was an uprising in New York led by the Coromantes, who gained a reputation across the so-called New World for being rebellious. It is both heartening and heartbreaking to contemplate the care, the attention to detail and sheer love which the people who were laid here went into their final resting place. They were buried this way so that through death they might finally, in their ancestral realm, receive all that they had been deprived of in the physical realm. So we lay this wreath in honor of those buried here who resisted domination and disrespect, and also in recognition of their valiant pursuit of freedom. What could possibly prepare any human being for the indignity of being stripped of their basic humanity, or being bought, kept, and sold as property? A half mile away from here, on the shore of the East River at Wall Street, which is considered the financial capital of the world, that is where the slave market was situated. That distance from the auction block to this burial ground, from the start of their new lives in America to the end of their natural lives in this world, may have been brief in terms of miles and even in years, but was very long in suffering, misery, and pain. African people could not be buried in such cemeteries. They could not be buried in private cemeteries. They could not be buried where white people were buried. They could not even be buried in paupers' cemeteries, where the homeless, indigent, or incurably ill were buried. They could not bury their dead in the evenings. And when there was a burial, only a dozen or a few people were allowed to attend. So the deceased were even stripped of the public ceremony that was a customary rite in so many of the homelands from where they had been plucked. But we are here today as we were in 2003, when the remains of those who had been exhumed were reinterred.
For your strength, for your resilience, for your courage.